5. Annabelle. Well, it wouldn't quite be a video about the Warrens without Annabelle. Do you ever wonder, did they ever thank her for all the good publicity she gave them over the years? Now, by now, I'm sure all of you are very familiar with the tale of Annabelle, the haunted doll that Ed and Lorraine kept captive, and probably the most famous case the two of them were involved in. They say that the Amityville Horror was their most famous case, but they made 3 spin-off movies just about Annabelle, so she's pretty big shakes. It was given to a nursing student as a gift from her mother, and within days it turned bad. Notes would appear around the house, scrawled in blood, that read out terrifying messages like, "Help me." It allegedly lunged at the girl's boyfriend one night, grabbing him by the neck. And after that, Ed and Lorraine were called in. I mean, as soon as a toy in your apartment starts trying to choke you out, yeah, definitely get some outside help. They called in to help exorcise the demon inside Annabelle. Now, in the end, they kept her locked up tight, surrounded by rosaries and holy water to ensure the demon inside can't harm anyone anymore. Now, while the stories inspired by Annabelle have gone on to big, great things, and the fictional Annabelle has enjoyed quite the career as a movie star, the real Annabelle is still locked away to keep that evil dormant. In this recently released footage, we're treated to some up-close and personal glamour shots of Annabelle in the flesh, or stuffing, maybe? Locked tight behind her cage. And this footage comes to us from Tony Spera, the son-in-law of Ed and Lorraine, who's taken it upon himself to maintain their legacy on his YouTube channel. If you're a big Ed and Lorraine fan, go check it out, because there's hours and hours of stuff to work through. He takes us on a brief tour of the museum, but gets up close and personal with Annabelle herself. Even through a YouTube screen, you can almost feel some evil energy radiating off this doll. Now, sadly, the Warrens Museum of the Occult is currently closed, so you can't visit Annabelle right now, but they're hoping to reopen it one day soon, so Annabelle can get back to scaring her fans in person like she always has. She makes convention appearances, did you know that? She just recently was at the Warrens Paracon, the convention dedicated to supernatural hunters of the unknown. I'm not sure if I personally would take a selfie with Annabelle. I wouldn't want to ruin her photo like that, unless I could guarantee she'd look really good. I don't want to offend her in any way. I try not to upset any cursed dolls. And if you're looking for way more stories about Ed and Lorraine Warren, true tales of terror, fake fibs of fright, ghouls, goblins, cryptids, aliens, true crime, basically everything scary under the sun and above it, Top 5 Scary is the only place to be. Stay subscribed, stay scared, and don't miss a thing. But let's keep going, because we got a whole lot more video to go through. Number 4. Under Scotland. Now, the Warrens' investigations did not just take them on road trips all over the United States. Now, the Warrens might have visited a case in almost every state and then some. The Warrens' journeys saw them traveling all over the globe in an effort to uncover truths and combat evil wherever it was found. In this recently posted footage, we get to see a unique perspective from the Warrens, focusing on Lorraine Warren digging around underground in the secret vaults beneath Edinburgh. Under the ground is a series of large cavernous vaults that were once used as a storage space for merchants, but when abandoned, became home to Edinburgh's lowest and poorest, who began to make it their dwellings. Probably really nice, what with no daylight, musty air, a thriving rodent population, and hey, for the right price, that honestly sounds better than most apartments in Toronto. Because of this, the vaults were the perfect place to conduct a little nefarious business, if you know what I mean. You know, all sorts of nasty crimes that aren't fit to discuss on YouTube. It's believed that 2 of Edinburgh's most prolific criminals hid bodies here before taking them to medical schools to sell off. So, because of its grim history, it's no surprise that people believe the vaults to be haunted, claiming they feel watched or touched when walking through them. So when supernatural weirdness happens, the Warrens are soon to follow. This one's actually pretty cool. It's kind of like going on a ghost tour from your own home. First person, making you feel like you're exploring those subterranean depths with her. The real highlight though is the guide, who's this very geriatric Scottish man who seems to know the tunnels very well. If I ever take this tour, I need to insist on my guide being an old Scottish man who I almost can't understand. That seems like the most appropriate and trustworthy way to go ghost hunting. Now, they didn't find anything too much on this investigation, but while in there, Lorraine claims that she can feel something communicating with her long ago. Could it just be the spirits from long ago, or radio feedback? Let me know in the comments. Number 3, the Donovan Poltergeist. Now, our next entry is going to cover the Donovan Poltergeist, an often forgotten case in the Ed and Lorraine Warren oeuvre. In this clip, moderator Tony Spera, he's coming up a lot in this video, mentions that Ed has told him that on a scale of 1 to 10 for demonic intensity, I love that you can rank demonic intensity like that, the Warrens found this case to be a 10. Now, I gotta ask, if it's so intense, Hence, I wonder why it's not more well known, but maybe they're keeping it hush hush because this is going to be the plot of Conjuring 4, so I'm giving you the spoilers right now. The Donovan Poltergeist case was in West Hartford, Connecticut, when a young girl had come into possession of a Ouija board, one of the most haunted Hasbro products ever released, alongside the game Sorry. Ed briefly talks about how people can be so dismissive of Ouija boards. I mean, imagine who would be so dismissive of Ouija boards. Don't know anybody like that. And Ed mentions that although they may seem innocent and unbecoming like a children's toy, a Ouija board is an invitation for spirits to come and disrupt. The girl in question in the Donovan case asked the Ouija board all sorts of questions and started to get answers that only a spirit could give. Ed says that the spirit needed something in return, and afterwards her house started to become rabid. Objects thrashed around, levitating, so on. Ed describes a violent interaction with a poltergeist, claiming that at one point during their investigation, he found himself literally pinned to the wall by a malevolent spirit. He describes as well the house being pelted with rocks from the sky and objects vanishing. Imagine the size of the umbrella you would need if it's raining rocks. This definitely sounds pretty extreme, all things considered. They claim that they would watch things dematerialize in front of their very own eyes, as if Mr. Scott was teleporting them away on the Star Trek transporter. Now, eventually, Ed describes getting in contact with a priest to perform an exorcism on the cursed house, freeing the family from spectral torment. And stay tuned to see if that's going to be the plot for Conjuring 4. I'm almost pretty sure. Number 2, the Japanese tunnels. Among the many accolades and achievement in his career before he was a ghost hunter, Ed Warren was a veteran of the US Navy and served in the Second World War and spent a good amount of time stationed around Japan. As such, from a young age, he developed an interest in Japanese folklore and the yokai and spirits that go with it. So naturally, they had to take a trip out east to go investigate some spirits there. They took a trip to Nagoya to investigate an apartment building that allegedly was being haunted by the floating head of an ancient samurai warrior. That's unnerving. I've heard of headless ghosts. I've even heard of nearly headless ghosts. But I think this is the first time I've heard of a ghost that was just a head. I think that honestly might be way scarier, just seeing a head like floating around down a hallway, but that's just me. Now, this wasn't the sole focus of their journeys though, they had more going on. The two of them also sought out an exploration of Japan's haunted tunnels, a tunnel where 200 people were allegedly buried alive after an avalanche during a typhoon trapped some 200 souls inside and made the tunnel their grave. Local reports would claim that the people would hear the screams of the damned late at night. So Ed and Lorraine visited it, and they both said it was terrifying and claimed that walking through it was freezing, the coldest thing either of them had ever experienced. Ed said a bitter cold came over him as he reached the end. He relays as well a story of a young man who tried to challenge his fear of the supernatural and ride a motorcycle right through this tunnel, but paid for it with his life and crashed. Now, for what it's worth, you know I love playing skeptic around here. You know I love getting my Scully on. I'm more of a Scully than I am a Mulder. I think this might be more of an urban legend because I did do a lot of digging for this video and I could not find any confirmed stories of a mass death inside a tunnel in Japan from an avalanche, but it's possible that it could be lost to time, very ancient, maybe records get lost, but nonetheless, interesting to listen to. And number 1, the Amityville interview. Now, the Warrens argued that the most famous case they ever worked on was the Amityville Horror, and there's no denying that when this case happened, it gripped the American public. In 1973, Ronald DeFeo took a hunting rifle and went one by one, ending the lives of each one of his family members remorselessly while they slept. He would later go on to claim that he was being commanded to do it. He was compelled by spirits to act this way. A little bit later, a new family, the Lutzes, moved into the Amityville house, aware of what had transpired, but moving forward with it anyway. It's just such a good deal on rent. You gotta take it where you can get it. In this recently released footage, we hear from Ed and Lorraine speaking in great detail about their experiences working on the infamous legendary case on their TV program Seekers of the Supernatural with the Warrens. Lorraine outlines how immediately upon walking in she felt stepping into the house, she felt immediately wrong. She reiterates that upon entering, she felt a great unnerving presence. She says pretty much as soon as she entered the sewing room, she turned to the homeowner and said, "I hope this is as close to hell as I get." That's raw. The sewing room allegedly is where a focus of the haunting was, where the hundreds of flies apparated, where the spectral voices were heard telling people to get out. They speak as well of how they brought a reverend with them in the investigation who felt a physical slap in his face walking in. And if you're looking for more details about the Amityville case, the movie from the 70s and the movie with Ryan Reynolds, both pretty good retellings of the story. Ed goes on to address allegations that the Amityville case was a hoax, saying he offered a $3,000 reward for anyone who could prove to him that it was faked. Later in life, the lawyer representing Ronald DeFeo claims that the entire haunting story was a concoction he made up with the Lutzes over a bottle of wine in an effort to get a retrial for his client and drum up a bit of book business for the Lutzes. No word if he ever ended up getting $3,000 out of Ed. So whether or not the story really happened is one thing, but I think we can all agree the folklore that has come out of it is interesting enough and is a definitive part of the greater American mythos, this classic haunted house story. And it's entertaining nonetheless. Number 5. Amityville. It's hard to say outright what the most famous Warren case would be. Annabelle, maybe? The Perrins family that would inspire The Conjuring? If we're going solely on the amount of movies made based on one case, then it absolutely has to be the Amityville haunting. Amityville, Long Island was the center stage for one of America's most infamous and strange cases. In 1974, the house had been owned by the DeFeo family, until one day Ronald DeFeo Jr. went one by one with a rifle and ended the life of every member of his family, claiming that spirits and voices from beyond had told him to do it. Not even a year later, the Lutz family would move in, not particularly bothered by the house's dark history. I guess they were getting a great deal. During the first month of living there, they realized almost right away that something was wrong. Swarms of flies appearing everywhere, banging noises, and even seeing spectral apparitions of monstrous animals or phantasmal beings, you know, usual stuff when you move into a fixer-upper. The experts in the paranormal, Ed and Lorraine Warren, were called in to investigate the haunting to see if there was anything they could do. They brought with them camera crews and tried to record their findings, most famously finding a photo of what appeared to be the ghost of a young boy, replete with shimmering eyes staring down from the stairwell. It's actually pretty chilling. Now, it should be addressed that even by skeptic standards, there is a lot of debate as to whether the Amityville Horror was closer to the Amityville hoax. George Lutz, the patriarch of the Lutz family, contacted the DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, who said he was trying to get a book written up about the client, and Weber had later told news media that the haunting was all just a grand exaggeration that he had collaboratively made up with the Lutz family over a bottle of wine, in the hopes of getting a retrial and in the hopes of getting a bit of commercial success for the Lutz family. So I ask you, what do you think? Real example of America's most famous haunting, or just a scary story to sell some books and make some movies? And my ghouls and goblins, if you're looking for more terrifying true tales, or maybe true tales, from ghosts to cryptids to aliens and way more, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then like 10,000 videos on top of that. Drop a like, a subscribe if you'd like, and if you want to stay scared, you know where to go. Alright, moving on. Number 4. Enfield. Another very famous chapter from the Warrens' playbook was the Enfield Poltergeist. While not quite as legendary as their other cases, it was still compelling enough to serve as the inspiration for the second Conjuring film. Now, this movie took a few liberties here and there, but for the most part was fairly inspired by the real case, so let's take a little look over as to what truly happened in Enfield all those years ago. It was 6 years after the Perrin family haunting, all the way up in Enfield, England. The Hodgson family had been living there peacefully, one single mother, Peggy Hodgson, and her 4 children. It was the summer of 1977, when the youngest members of the Hodgson family seemed to be being targeted by some invisible presence. They saw the dresser of their bedroom sliding across the room as if a powerful force was pushing it all around. They would hear constant knocking from all over. The family had called the police, worried that there might have been a burglar, and when officers arrived, they claimed they arrived to a home where the furniture was free floating throughout the air. Over the course of a year, psychics, investigators, amateur and otherwise, all came to the Enfield house in the hopes that they would be the one to be able to crack this case and figure out just what was causing these mysterious occurrences. Of course, among them was Ed and Lorraine Warren. You probably could have guessed that, that's why I'm talking about it in the video. They were certain that they had on their hands another classic poltergeist scenario. Now, unlike the film, the story actually does differ pretty greatly here. In the real story, the Warrens were not terribly involved with the Enfield haunting at all. In fact, and were barely there for a few days even. There's even some reports that they were there strictly for media attention, saying to another investigator that we can make some real money off this case. Most of the investigators called believed that the case had been a hoax and largely exaggerated and stretched by people involved. And the Warrens thought they had a pretty good case on their hands. But was that because there was a real spirit? Or is it just because they knew they had a great plot outline for a possible movie sequel in their franchise? exorcised someday. In 1979, the Enfield haunting kind of just up and stopped abruptly. No more sightings, no more reports, and no one was ever really sure what had happened. Was it ever really there? Number 3. The Perrins house. This maybe is the most famous of all the Warrens cases, and definitely one of the most recognizable, as it was the case that inspired the first of the Conjuring smash hit films, and I'll be honest, it's probably why you even know who the Warrens are. I'm certain if you're watching this video or you've been a longtime fan of the channel, you know the ins and the outs of the Perrins family haunting probably better than I do, to be honest. But hey, we could all use a little refresher and a little touch-up sometimes. There's nothing wrong with review, so let's get right into it. In 1971, the Perrins family moved their 5 daughters into a massive farmhouse in Rhode Island. I think the thing had like 14 bedrooms or something just absurd. It seemed perfect for Carolyn and Roger Perrin. They had found their dream home. It was spacious, it was a nice neighborhood, there was room for their kids to play. It would have been a perfect forever home if it wasn't for the fact that malicious spirits had already decided to make it theirs. Shortly after the Perrins moved in, they noticed a series of inexplicable happenings. At first it was pretty benign, you know, some things go missing, objects move unexpectedly, you find a chair in a room you wouldn't expect it to, but then it ramped up rather quickly. The Perrins would claim every morning they would smell the smell of rotten flesh, and they would wake up to discover their beds levitating, and you know what, on some mornings I'd probably sleep right through that too. The family researched the house a little and discovered that it had been owned by a lineage of one family for 8 generations, with many members of the family dying under some pretty mysterious circumstances. They also learned that a woman named Bathsheba had lived there, a possible Satanist and witch, and they believed that she was haunting the home, threatened by Carolyn Perrin's energy, seeing her as a threat to her. This is when the Warrens were called in to do a seance, to try and commune with the spirits beyond. One of the Perrins' daughters claims that they saw their mother speak in tongues, possessed by the spirits. Now, in the film, they went a bit Hollywood with it. The Warrens perform an exorcism and Ed Warren saves the day. But the real story wasn't so neatly wrapped up. The Warrens were actually kicked out of this house by Roger Perrin, who said that they were just making things worse and they were making his wife's mental health worsen. The Perrins would end up remaining living in that home for the better part of a decade. And you know what? Honestly, if rent was good enough, and if I could get those malevolent spirits to offer to, I don't know, help out with the dishes every now and again, maybe kick in a few bucks for Hydra and the internet, I'd probably be okay with it too. Number 2, the Southland werewolf. Now here is an interesting one for you. This is probably one of the oddest cases in the history of a pair of demonologists who made a career of exclusively investigating the most bizarre cases possible. It takes us back to England once more, this time in Essex. Now, unlike a majority of the Warrens' cases, this wasn't a haunted house or a poltergeist, but it was someone claiming that they had been cursed with lycanthropy. A fairly innocuous carpenter, one William Ramsey, had claimed that since boyhood he had been cursed to transform into a werewolf. I am so jealous. It hurts so bad seeing someone live out your dreams. I wanted to be a werewolf more than anybody, and I didn't get it. He claims that it had plagued him his entire life, his first transformation occurring during boyhood. He was playing outside when he felt an icy breeze come over his skin, freezing his sweat in place. He said he then felt this primal bloodlust and hunger come over him and was overwhelmed by a pungent foul odor. He flew into a fit of rage and found himself tearing up a fence post with the fence still attached and gnawing at the wire mesh. You know, just regular stuff that kooky old kids do. For years, he thought it was just a very bizarre chapter in his life, something that came over a boy no one could explain. But in 1983, Will was out with friends when he felt it come over him again. He felt that freezing cold chill on his skin and excused himself to the bathroom. It's here where he claims he saw the face of a wolf staring back at him in the mirror. He called a cab home and claims he started to growl and try to bite his fellow passenger. The driver stopped the car, cause you know, I don't want a werewolf in my backseat either, and tried to get the raging man out of the back seat, and after minutes of thrashing, he finally calmed down. The years would keep going and William would do his level best to keep that inner beast in check. But it was in 1989 as his stories made the rounds of the tabloids that caught the attention of Ed and Lorraine, who convinced William to travel to Connecticut to visit them for an exorcism. Initially, William was skeptical, which I find very surprising. You think that you're turning into a werewolf, but an exorcism makes you raise an eyebrow. Anyway, I digress. He ended up visiting, and reports claim that after a long night of violent thrashing, the wolf was exorcised from his soul. And since then, William Ramsey found peace. And number 1, the Smurl house. Bringing us back to a more classic haunting, the Smurl house is one of the more intense hauntings the Warrens took on. In 1974, Janet and Jack Smurl moved into a new house in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. They claim almost as soon as they moved in, they found themselves at odds with an invisible force that was terrorizing their family. They claim something was causing loud noises, horrible odors, and at one point, straight up launched their dog across the living room. Although maybe he might have found that fun. I don't know, I've met some dogs who were into stuff like that. The Smurls lived with this torment, I guess just assuming that dealing with a poltergeist was something every suburban family has to deal with in the 70s. It really seemed like it was a real problem back then. It wasn't until 1986, nearly ensuring a decade of haunting, that the Smurls thought it was time to call in some outside help, specifically from Ed and Lorraine Warren. When they arrived, Ed claimed the demon living inside the Smurls' home was very powerful, that it shook the mirrors and furniture when they arrived. Ed tried to scare it out by playing religious music and prayer. Sadly, this didn't quite work. I think you gotta try something a little heavier, maybe like Slayer, Megadeth, that might scare a demon, or they might find it awesome. Ed claims that he saw a dark mass forming in the home, something more powerful than he was expecting. He claims too he once saw a message appearing on one of the mirrors, warning the pair that they needed to leave. Months went by where the Warrens tried everything they could do to get rid of the demon, but nothing was taking. Eventually, it took in 1986 when a group of exorcists came to the house, and all took turns exorcising the house, and a priest even moved to the area, moved to the neighborhood just to keep an eye on things, make sure no demons were starting nothing. Number 5, the Amityville Horror photo. The Warrens had been around, claiming to have seen 10,000 cases in their lifetime, but there are few of many cases that got them as much renown and people talking as the Amityville Horror case. Way before there were any Conjuring movies, way before it was a smash hit franchise, they were already making tons of movies about Amityville. The Warrens have been in the silver screen since the beginning. Amityville, Long Island was the center stage for the most infamous and strange case in America. In 1974, the house had been owned by the DeFeo family, until one day, Ronald DeFeo Jr. went one by one with a rifle and claimed the life of every member of his family, later going on and telling people that spirits had commanded him to do so. After this horrifying event, a year later, the Lutz family would move in, not much bothered by the house's dark history. You know, in this market, you gotta take a good deal on rent wherever you can get it. During the first month of living there, they realized almost right away that something was wrong. Swarms of flies, banging noises, and spectral apparitions of monstrous animals or phantasmal beings that the real estate agent definitely did not mention. Now, the Warrens were called in as they were experts in the paranormal, and they were called in to investigate the haunting and see if there was anything they could do. They brought with them camera crews and tried to record their findings, most famous among them a photo of what appears to be the ghost of a boy with shimmering eyes staring down from the stairwell. It's truly chilling stuff. Now, it has to be addressed even by skeptic standards. Sorry, we gotta play Scully, can't all be Mulder over here. That there is a lot of debate as to whether or not the Amityville Horror was more like the Amityville hoax. George Lutz, the father of the Lutz family, contacted the DeFeo's lawyer, William Weber, and said he was trying to get a book written up about the client. And Weber had told news media that the haunting was all just a story he had made up with the Lutz family over a bottle of wine, in the hopes of getting a retrial, and in the hopes of getting a little bit of change for the Lutz family. So, what do you think? Was this America's most famous haunting, or was it just a fantastic backdrop for a series of okay movies? And my ghouls and goblins, if you're looking for some more terrifying true tales, or tales that ain't so true, from ghosts to cryptids to aliens and a whole lot more, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then way more. Drop a like and subscribe and stay scared. Okay, moving on. Number 4, Enfield. Another very discussed case from Ed and Lorraine Warren's case files is the infamous Enfield Poltergeist haunting. It served as the backdrop for the second Conjuring film, although the second Conjuring took a bit more liberties than the other films. There was no Crooked Man or Valak in the original haunting story, but it's still pretty interesting to listen to nonetheless. It captivated audiences worldwide after photos surfaced showing what looked to be the young Hodgsons being possessed and thrown about the room levitating. It was 6 years after the Warrens had investigated the Perrins family haunting, all the way in Enfield, England. The Hodgson family had been living peacefully there, helmed by the single mother Peggy Hodgson and her 4 children. It was the summer of 1977 when the youngest members of the Hodgson family seemed to be being targeted by spirits. They saw the dresser of their bedroom sliding across the room as if a powerful invisible force was pushing it all around. They would hear constant knocking from all over. Now, the family called the police because they were worried that there had been in a burglary. And when the officers arrived, they claimed that they arrived to a home where the furniture was free floating throughout the air. Pretty wild stuff. Now, over the course of a year, psychics, investigators, amateur, and all kinds of paranormal enthusiasts came to the Enfield house in the hopes that they would be able to figure out the haunting and crack the case. Of course, it goes without saying that if this many paranormal enthusiasts were all congregating in one place, Ed and Lorraine Warren were definitely there. They were certain they had their hands on a classic poltergeist scenario. Now, like I said, between the film and the true story, they differ pretty greatly in this example. Really, the Warrens were not terribly involved with the Enfield haunting that much at all. In fact, they were barely there for a few days even. Most of the investigators that had arrived to the Enfield property had kind of suspected that it might have been a hoax, or that things had been largely exaggerated or misunderstood and stretched by people involved. But the Warrens believed that they had a good, firm case on their hands. Now, unfortunately, we can't ask them, so we can only speculate. Was that because there was a real spirit, a real haunting, or is it just because they had the foresight and they knew that this was going to make a great script for an entry in a movie franchise someday? In 1979, 2 years after the first reportings, the Enfield haunting mysteriously stopped. No more sightings, no more reports. Was it ever really there? Number 3, the shadow doll. When you enter the Warrens' haunted museum, one of the first things you'll see is this frightening little doll, affectionately dubbed the shadow doll. It's made of bird feathers and real human teeth. Oh, that's just lovely, thanks. It's currently owned by Tony Spera, the son-in-law of the late Warrens and the current proprietor of the museum. He offers a little bit of insight into the doll's unique history, saying it was originally acquired at an antique shop where it was being sold with the owner unaware of the doll's negative energy, which I feel that is totally on you. You're running an antique store and you're not a little bit concerned that someone came to you with a doll with real human teeth and bird feathers? I feel like you don't need to know that much about the occult or to be a big horror movie guy to know that is definitely cursed. If somebody comes in and drops a doll off of your store that has human teeth, your first response has to be to chuck that thing in the ocean, not put a $14.99 price tag on it. Oh, anyway, Spera claims the doll has an insidious little gift inside of it, and that's if you take a photograph of the doll and then the photo develops, you write a curse that you'd like to inflict on the back of the photo, and then you send it to your victim. The person who then opens the envelope and sees the doll in the photo will invite the curse into your home. And I know what you're worrying about right now. Are you cursed right now watching this video? Nah, you're good. I think digital photos are fine, and besides, I would never write any curses on any of these photos. And if I was ever gonna curse you, I would curse you to always make the right amount of pasta and have your crush text you back. I would only curse you something real nice. Now, my big question about the shadow doll is, do you think it gets jealous having to share museum space with Annabelle? How hard must it be to be the second most famous cursed doll in a museum of cursed dolls? People come in all day to gawk at your movie star sister, get autographs and selfies with her, and you just have to sit and stew. No wonder the doll is cursing people. I think it's got some repressed aggression. Number 2, the Southend werewolf. This is maybe one of the odder cases in the Warrens' history, which is really saying something since the only thing the Warrens ever investigated was incredibly odd cases. This one was back in England again, in Essex. The Warrens got word of a particularly unusual case. This wasn't a haunted house or a poltergeist or a suspected demon possession or anything. This was someone claiming they had come down bad with a case of lycanthropy. There was a bad moon rising over Essex. A carpenter by the name of William Ramsey had claimed that since his youth, he had been cursed into transforming into a werewolf. Not every night or on full moons, but seemingly random times, the spirit of a wolf would overtake him and he would go feral. It hurts seeing someone live out your childhood dreams like that. He claims that he's been plagued his whole life, and his first transformation occurred when he was a boy. He was playing outside when he felt an icy breeze coming over his skin, freezing his sweat to his skin. He then said he felt a primal bloodlust and hunger coming over him, and he was overwhelmed by a pungent, awful odor. He flew into a fit of rage and found himself shredding a fence post with the fence still attached and chewing at wire mesh. Now, for years he wrote this off as a strange incident. You know, something that every boy goes through when you're growing up. Puberty's a strange time. It wasn't until 1983 that the wolf came out to play again. William was out at the pub with his friends when he felt that familiar chill come over him. He felt the sweat freezing to his skin and excused himself to go to a bathroom, and claims that when he looked into the mirror, all he saw back was a wolf's unmistakable snout and yellow eyes staring back at him. He called the cab home, but had to be held down by the driver because he was thrashing and lashing out at the driver and other passengers. Eventually, he composed himself, I think they gave him a milk bone, and he tried to live quietly after these incidents. It was in 1989 when Ed and Lorraine caught wind of the case. They invited him to get to Connecticut for a personal exorcism. I thought it was silver bullets that dealt with werewolves, but I guess that's probably a more permanent solution. Exorcism was probably the right way to go. Initially, William was skeptical, which I find kind of interesting. You turn into a werewolf, but you're skeptical that an exorcism will make a difference? Anyway, he ended up visiting, and reports claim that after a long night of violent thrashing, the wolf was finally exorcised, and since then, William Ramsey was able to find peace. At number 1, the satanic idol. I don't know, Ed and Lorraine, a satanic idol? A human skull? Well, those things sound like they could be haunted. Do you guys like haunted things? No way a satanic idol and human skull that were involved in dark rituals are haunted. No way. The skull was given to the Warrens as a gift, which is kind of an odd gift to someone, but hey, they were kind of odd people, so they were probably thrilled to death with it. Now the idol is a different story. The tall, slender, bizarre idol doesn't immediately scream Satan or satanic, but you can take a look at it and you'd kind of be unnerved. This is not the kind of thing I would bring in off the side of the road. It's not the kind of thing you'd want to catch in the woods, and yet for one lonesome hunter, that is exactly what happened. Apparently the idol and the skull with it were taken from the woods nearby to the Warren estate by a local hunter who'd found them. The hunter claims he was approached by a man in mysterious black garb who ushered him away. Now obviously he was a little shaken and stirred by such a bizarre experience, so he went to the only people he thought he'd be able to trust with something like this, the Warrens, and took the idol to them for safekeeping. After he brought it to them, Lorraine fell deeply ill with no one able to diagnose what was happening to her. Ed believed that his family was being targeted for welcoming the idol into their home. Hey, you'd think that a demonologist would have seen that one coming, but hey, we all make mistakes. Lorraine recovered, and although no details emerged on how she did or what they did to purify and cleanse the idol, we can assume most likely it was probably blessed, exorcised, and doused in holy water of some kind, otherwise it wouldn't be fit to sit amongst their other treasures. It now rests inside the museum, alongside all of their other haunted relics. It's evil waiting inside, as it waits patiently for a Hollywood executive to come to it, and it's open to offers for a 3-picture deal with spin-offs included.
Number 5. Union Cemetery. In Weston, Connecticut, there is a cemetery that many paranormal investigators and enthusiasts claim is one of the most haunted locations in the entire state. As legend goes, many years ago, a man was driving down the road when a woman suddenly appeared in the middle of the road. The driver didn't have time to stop or slow down and struck the woman, but when he pulled over to try and help the woman, she was nowhere to be seen. Since then, several people have reported seeing the woman in white wandering around the cemetery grounds. Some believe she is a woman who lost her son and is still searching for him, while others believe she may have been a jilted bride who took her own life. Either way, it is a local legend that draws a lot of visitors to the town. Oddly enough, this cemetery is just down the road from the home of Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they claimed to have spent a large amount of time trying to find evidence of the White Lady. In 1990, Ed claimed that while he was staying overnight in the cemetery, he saw the bride. As he described it, "I heard a woman weeping, and I looked out and saw hundreds of ghost lights floating around and forming into the figure of a woman. I couldn't make out facial features." He claimed that he did manage to capture this encounter on video, however. This is of course very exciting, as definitive proof of paranormal activity is rare and could completely change the way people view their own mortality. When asked to show the footage that would validate his claims, Ed said, "No. This is the incident that is least clearly a lie out of all of them on this list, but it is typical behavior from the Warrens, who claimed that they had proof that they then simply refused to show to anyone all the way up until their deaths." Oddly enough, the ghosts of the Warrens sometimes pass through the dark dimension and visit me. I even have a recording of it on my phone that proves I'm telling the truth. You can't see it though. You'll just have to take my word for it. Number 4. The Amityville Case. Perhaps the most infamous case the Warrens ever came into contact with, George and Kathy Lutz moved into a house and claimed to experience paranormal activity. A year prior, the house had been the site of a horrible crime, with 23-year-old Ronnie Defoe going from room to room and shooting his 6 family members in cold blood. At his trial, he claimed that voices he had heard on the night of the crime had told him to do it and had controlled his body, but this was not believed believed, and he was sentenced to 6 life sentences. The Lutz family moved in and reportedly would experience phenomena like unexplained gelatinous drops appearing on their carpet, witnessing each other suddenly appearing to have aged 90 years, doors slamming by themselves, levitating, and waking up every night at 3:15 a.m., the time the murders took place. The family fled soon after and invited reporters and psychic researchers to study the house. The Warrens, of course, showed up, with Lorraine claiming the house was possessed by demons and using the opportunity to get her and Ed on TV, cementing their reputations as paranormal experts, despite not showing any evidence of their findings. The Lutzes published a book about their experiences that was made into a successful movie series called The Amityville Horror, but years later, they would admit that much of the book was highly exaggerated, with much of the content being the result of a creative brainstorming session and 4 bottles of wine. So, much of the activity that the Warrens were validating with their investigation never occurred. But what about the killer saying he had been controlled and forced to shoot his family? Well, years later he admitted that had just been a lie, designed to get him off with an insanity plea. The majority of the lying in this case was by people other than the Warrens, so maybe they were just taken along for the ride. But there are still plenty of examples of them being suspicious to downright hucksters. Number 3. Annabelle. The most famous item in the Warrens' occult museum is of course Annabelle. She has featured in the Conjuring films as well as a few movies of her own, and has made people really think twice about buying any dolls secondhand. According to the Warrens, the doll, who in real life is a simple Raggedy Ann doll, not a creepy looking toy like in the movie that no child in their right mind would ever play with, was given to a nursing student in 1970 by her mother. The doll began exhibiting strange behavior, and the nurse and her roommate contacted a medium who said that the doll was being possessed by the spirit of a woman named Annabelle Higgins. The two took pity on the spirit and allowed it to stay in the doll. The doll began escalating its scary behavior. They threw the doll away, but it somehow appeared in their apartment again, leaving threatening notes. The two contacted the Warrens, who told them that Annabelle was really a demon. The Warrens took the doll away and made it the centerpiece of their museum. Of course, there is no documentation of any of this, and we have to just take the Warrens' word on it. However, skeptics eventually noticed that the story of the doll was very similar to an episode of The Twilight Zone that had aired 7 years before. In episode number 126, The Living Doll, a little girl is given a doll by her mother, Annabelle. The girl's stepfather doesn't like the doll, who, when wound up, begins talking to him, telling him that she doesn't like him. Thinking it is a manufacturer's defect, he throws the doll out, but the doll soon reappears and starts leaving him threatening messages until eventually tripping him on the stairs and killing him. The similarities are enough that many doubt the validity of the stories the Warrens have told about Annabelle. Is this an example of the Warrens stealing a story from TV? Or an example of life imitating art in a way that is both terrifying and disturbing, and that could never happen anywhere else but the Twilight Zone? Number 2. The Haunting in Connecticut. In the late 1980s, Carmen and Alan Snedeker and their 5 daughters and 2 nieces moved into a home in Southington, Connecticut, as their oldest son was suffering from Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they wanted to be closer to his doctors. The home that they rented turned out to be a former funeral home, which made the family a bit on edge, but they chose to stay regardless, as it was difficult to find an affordable home for such a large family. Things began getting strange, with objects disappearing, and the children reportedly seeing a man with long black hair around the house. The eldest son began exhibiting strange and violent behavior, and doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. His parents decided to consult Ed and Lorraine. They spent weeks in the house to get the full demonic experience and declared that the home was filled with great evil because the morticians who had worked in the home had been practicing necromancy. They performed an exorcism, and things more or less returned to normal. The story would eventually be adapted into the Haunting in Connecticut film, and the Warrens published a book detailing the case called In a Dark Place, which was written by them with the help of horror novelist Ray Garton, who was hired to interview the Snedekers and shape their testimony into a narrative. When the various family members' stories began to conflict with each other, Ray talked to Ed Warren about his concerns, and Ed responded by saying, "Oh, they're crazy. You've got some of the story. Just use what works, just make it up, and make it scary." Due to this, the entire case has become laced in controversy in the years since, with Garton distancing himself from his involvement with the supposedly non-fiction book. Number 1. The happy Christian family. The Warrens made a point of portraying themselves as a perfect, loving couple who supported each other while using their supposed gifts to help people who were in trouble and spread the message of God. This carries over into the Conjuring films that were inspired by their lives, with both critics and fans consistently bringing up their relationship as a highlight of the films, with it often being called one of the best love stories of the horror genre. But in real life, they were not quite the shining example of God's perfect couple that they would have you believe. Lorraine Warren had a very large role in shaping how her and her late husband were portrayed on film, with some very specific demands written into her contract. Frankly, a little too specific. Her contract with Warner Brothers explicitly states that neither Ed or Lorraine Warren could be depicted engaging in a physical relationship with in the Conjuring series. Furthermore, neither the husband or wife could be depicted as participating in an extramarital relationship. But why these extremely specific demands? Well, in 2017, a woman named Judith Penny came forward, saying that when she was 15 and Ed Warren was in his 30s, Ed began a physical relationship with her and moved her into his and Lorraine's home, with his wife's knowledge. When Judith became pregnant with Ed's baby, Lorraine, the supposed staunch Catholic, was the one who persuaded her to terminate the pregnancy to avoid a scandal that would ruin the Warrens' careers. As if that weren't bad enough, Judith claims that while living with the couple, they would argue constantly, with the fight often getting physically violent, with Ed routinely attacking Lorraine into unconsciousness. Not exactly the perfect couple that they claimed to be.